Welcome to the Holistic Mastery Podcast. On today's episode, we have a very special guest, Brendan Vermeire, also known as the Holistic Savage. Brendan is a functional medicine and functional mental health practitioner who is changing the way the world views mental health. He is the founder of the Metabolic Solutions Institute, the Functional Mental Health Practitioner Certification Program, and the Metabolic Solutions Research and Education Foundation. He's also the creator of the Mental Map Lab Panel and Neuroceutical Supplements. On top of this, he is a fitness and nutrition mastermind, boasting a 585-pound deadlift. In today's episode, we talk about Brendan's background, his personal story, how he got into functional medicine and functional mental health, his philosophies on life, his journey in martial arts, and much, much more. It's a very interesting and valuable episode you're not going to want to miss. Without further ado, let's get straight into it.
Well, thanks for coming on, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me, brother.
Yeah,
this is
awesome.
Cool. Be a good time.
Yeah, I was going to say, well, obviously, first thing, I got to say, you got to be probably the most jacked, functional health practitioner out there, which is fitting with the Holistic Savage name.
Yeah.
So, why do you think, more practitioners are not, in shape and look the part when you would think if they're really being holistic and kind of living the life themselves, they would at least be in decent shape?
I'm still trying to figure that one out. I'm biased because of my background in fitness and nutrition. And that's what's weird to me is my career has been a very organic evolution. And, I like to joke that I have a PhD in bro science, and that doesn't usually land as well as I think it should, which illustrates the problem further of it should land because that's great humor, number one. Number two, if you guys were, not meatheads or fitness junkies, that almost has a negative connotation to it. But we are seeing this increase in awareness around fitness and muscle as medicine, metabolic for mental health. But here's the thing, at the end of the day, there's a discrepancy between science of we have this new clinical study that shows that exercise might be good for you. First off, did we really need, a clinical trial to prove what should be intuitive common sense? But at the end of the day, are you about that life? Do you walk the walk? Do you talk the talk? Do you actually enjoy the process of sculpting your metabolism and crafting the capabilities and cultivating the innate capacity of what this machine was built for? Hippocrates or somebody smarter than me once upon a time, it's, a shame to grow old without ever seeing what your body can do. So especially I will finish by saying I firmly believe a well-prescribed fitness and nutrition regimen is going to, when integrated and the compliance and the consistency is there, but a well-prescribed nutrition fitness program is going to outperform any clinical protocol, any supplement regimen, or even generally any pharmaceutical regimen. Nutrition and fitness is what you do to get off the medications, and supplements to build upon that. So when I came into functional medicine, it became very clear to me there is a severe lack of fitness and even effective nutritional coaching. So got a ways to go.
Yeah, it's interesting because the more niche you get into health and specifically functional medicine, people view you as someone they can go to for questions, and then they'll come to you to have you analyze what they're doing or what should they be doing. And it's usually they already know the next 2 to 3 steps they could be taking that they're not taking that would be a prerequisite to introducing anything fancy or doing anything like a supplement protocol or testing or whatever. It's well, you already know you're eating this junk food. Why don't you just take care of that first? It's not good. Everyone has trouble figuring out, what's actually healthy. There's all this misinformation now with the internet and social media, right? But it's you can generally gauge what's correct enough. Eat whole foods. Most people know that. It's why don't you do that first? Everyone knows exercise is healthy. A lot of people think someone who doesn't exercise at all is walking is exercise, and it's they think of it's too little when it's it's zone 2 cardio is one of the best things you can do. You don't exercise at all and you never have in your life. Why don't you just start there? And a lot of people who do have exercise thoroughly still do that. So it's it doesn't need to be this big, huge thing that people are, just take it step by step. Do you find that kind of same thing?
100%. Yeah. I try to keep my language constructive because while I may not be like a PhD in clinical psychology, I've been observing human behavior, coaching humans to better health for a long time now. So I've seen it's more behavioral than anything else. It's the patterns, it's the neural wiring. And what's kind of ironic about my career is, I've established myself as being a very technical in the science, in the research guy. I can talk about mechanisms and science all day with the best of them, and yet at the same time I'll be the first to admit, like, we are way overcomplicating all of this. There's certainly a disconnection from common sense, a disconnection from nature, and a more, I don't even really want to use the word primal, because that's kind of its own whole movement that has become this capitalistic monetary thing. But at the end of the day, it's like we were designed to be out there and moving constantly. So we really don't need to overcomplicate it. And at the end of the day, I think there's a lot of the instant gratification addiction, the neurological addiction to constant stimulation. I mean, we're all reaching for our phones constantly. We're inundated with information. So we've gotten really heady and cerebral and myopic, and that's what makes the movie The Matrix so ironic, right? It's like, well, that's kind of what we're becoming. We're being sort of neurologically seduced into this virtual world that we spend all of our time. And there's that sensation of, well, if I'm consuming health information from all the best influencers on the internet or whatever, I'm taking action to improve my health. And it's like, why don't you put the phone down? Because a lot of it, first off, there is a lot of just pseudoscience, just not great information and trends and all of that. But either way, it's like, at some point, put the phone down and go actually do something. Go get a workout. Go walk in nature. And to your point, walking. I mean, I think it was another ancient Greek guy that said walking is man's best medicine or something like that. But if I had to, I would say my daily nature walks are honestly one of the most, and it doesn't happen every day. It's not happening today, that's for sure. But my nature walks are one of the most therapeutic things that I possibly do. And even it's humbling every time. I walk the same path, it's the same distance every time. And by the time I'm done, like, I'm tired. It's not even a long walk, maybe 60, 90 minutes. But like, you go walk briskly for an hour and a half in the woods and see it, like, oh, I'm kind of spent. So to your point, but we really just overcomplicate it too. And then it's like, well, who got more steps? It's like, just go walk in nature, be present with life.
Yeah. No, it's interesting too, because most people, when they think about like walk, they're thinking like a stroll versus, like you said, brisk walk. You're zone 2 a lot of the time, and your heart rate is going to be elevated, and it is a form of exercise. It's not just like, oh, go for a stroll around the block. That's still great too, but it's a little bit different. And when you're thinking of it from an exercise perspective, yeah.
Yep.
So I kind of like to go back to the start with my guests, like kind of, where'd you grow up? How did it all begin?
Yeah, the origin story. It's been a trip. This is kind of maybe the first phase of my life where it's like, okay, I have actually gotten somewhere, and I can own that and practice a lot of gratitude and humility. I feel more grounded and humble than I ever have in my whole life, But I think there's kind of this earned confidence of like, I've done what I needed to do to feel confident, and like, I know what I've done, and I also know I haven't even started my best work yet. Like, I'm just getting started, right? So it's sometimes kind of a weird feeling where it's like, okay, obviously, I have what I have, and I get a lot of great feedback. And I'm like, no, I haven't even started yet, guys. Like, this is all just prepping for the real work that I want to do. And my business models are reflective of that. But with the origin story of like, I don't know. I used to have this kind of cheesy tagline when I was younger. I'm slightly embarrassed of it, but it's still kind of endearing, of like, I'm just a boy from Kansas out to save the world, or something. It was something along those lines. Because back in the day, there was that sort of, I'm just a dude from Kansas. Like, I'm not anything special. I certainly never felt like anything special growing up. But I do think what set me apart is I've always just had this drive, this hunger, this curiosity, maybe this some degree of kind of a spiritual wanderlust. So I'm always trying to advance my position and keep growing and evolving. But through the years, like, I think the the crux of the story that really is the hero's journey, it was really leaving high school. And I'm like, well, what do I do with my life? You know, every 18-year-old that's graduating high school, what do I do with my life? But through high school, I knew exactly what I wanted to do, or at least at the time I was set on. Originally, it was I wanted to be a UFC fighter because I'm a lifelong martial artist. And then that didn't feel very practical. So I'm like, oh, Navy SEAL, because I read the book Lone Survivor. And I was just like, that is my destiny. I was convinced of it. So 18 years old, signed 6-year Navy SEAL contract. And then I was medically discharged from boot camp because I had pre-existing injury that needed surgery. And then I got really depressed after that because it's like, okay, I mean, I'm graduated from high school. I don't really want to just be a college kid, frat boy or something like that. That didn't resonate at all. You know, what would I even study? But I really like lived in the gym, you know, all through high school and beyond after high school. So the gym was my home. So was a very easy, natural, organic transition of, well, health and fitness professional. And I was very fortunate to start with a great company that is Lifetime. And that was a great sort of incubation center for me to grow and explore and get exposed to all these cool science things. But I just fell in love with serving other people, uplifting other people first and foremost. That really is deeply fulfilling. But serving people through, you know, health, fitness, nutrition. I knew I wanted to do more of the clinical, the technical. I was good at taking people through workouts or teaching nutrition or motivational interviewing, but I was like, that's not what I want to do forever. I don't want to trade my time for money. And then obviously I went through my own whole mental health crisis, and there's a whole huge backstory to that. Pretty traumatic stuff that I went through, put myself through, right? So that's really what set me on the path. I was already on the path to functional health, fitness, functional medicine. That was already set. But the mental health specialty really was going through my own mental health crisis and experiencing somebody else's mental health crisis. That's what really got me on this path.
Before we kind of go towards that, what was like until 18 years old, what was that like in terms of like the martial arts growing up? And then like, you know, your average high schooler is not super in the gym. So like, how did you end up, you know, at that point, which is pretty early?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I feel like I was a pretty, I don't know, like normal, goofy, ADHD, excitable kid. I was a happy kid, you know. And there was, you know, some family stuff that definitely shaped the path. My mom was really not in my life at all from the age of, that's a whole thing in itself. So kind of an absent maternal nurturing aspect. But then with martial arts, I largely credit martial arts of that's where I found myself for the first time ever. And it started young. I mean, I started when I was 9, 10, which was a little bit later. I wish I had started younger. I wish I had started wrestling younger. But martial arts that's what sculpted me. That's really where it all began because I took it very literally. I was like, I want to be a samurai when I grow up. I want to be a ninja when I grow up. And, you know, it didn't take me too long in my teenage years of, okay, well, samurais, that's not really a thing anymore. You're not going to be a ninja throwing stars at people. So that translated Navy SEAL, right? Navy SEAL, it's like, well, that's the modern day samurai. And it's not just about like, you know, cutting heads off or something. It was the philosophy of Bushido, right? It's the way of the samurai, the code of morals and honor that they lived by and died by so fervently, right? So that just really enchanted me of I couldn't imagine a better way to move through life than embodying those ideals thoroughly, you know, to the core. And that's something like I see in you there's a discipline in it, but it's not just discipline of like I don't know, self-loathing or some weird complex, but it's discipline on a deep soul spiritual level. And I think not enough people are in touch with that, and maybe their path just hasn't invited them to explore that aspect of themselves. I'm inclined to think would think a lot of people have some innate degree of that, but maybe they've never dug it up or explored it. But I think that, whatever that is, that's kind of what separates, I don't want to say success, because it's not about success. It's about the eudaimonic journey of becoming whatever it is that you're meant to be, your highest version of yourself.
Yeah. It's interesting you say that because it's like there does seem to be that spiritual aspect to discipline, and usually the type of person who has that, like you said, kind of innate discipline that they're connected with, they didn't just start out like that. It was something that was developed and some internal dialogues that led to that. So like in my case, like I actually think of myself as someone who has quite an addictive personality. And when I was younger, it might have been the quite opposite of discipline. I was lucky to have good parents, which kind of forced me to have that structure a bit, but it was kind of through struggling with not having the discipline to do something I want to do. Like, for example, I mean, I think a lot of people struggle with this, but you know, a bad habit that you want to quit, and you are tricking yourself mentally saying, all right, I'm going to quit, and then you don't quit, then you're going to quit, and you don't quit, in this kind of cycle, which kind of can degrade your confidence because you're proving, you know, you can't fool yourself at the end of the day. And once you kind of go down that path to come to the conclusion of like, all right, how are you going to conduct yourself in regards to these things, and then the rest of your life kind of from there. So yeah, martial arts definitely is probably in my opinion, like one of the best things any human can do as young as possible. And there's concerns people have with it and whatnot, but there's ways to go about it. I think that's totally comfortable for anyone, men, women, whatever it is, and really just structures you as a type of person. Because I think there's something unique that, like, why are we attracted to want to become like that Navy SEAL type? You know, it's like the capability, the competence. It's something about that, and being well-rounded, that you can function in the different environments. So it's not just being a meathead, but it's like you're physically capable, you're mentally capable,
Right.
kind of in all realms, which is kind of what I try to encapsulate with the podcast of like holistic mastery. So yeah, what was your kind of martial arts journey like from there? Like,
I mean, that's kind of where the whole holistic savage thing came from originally, was like when I first got on Instagram, I was still competing in the sport of bodybuilding at that point in time, but I really didn't identify as a bodybuilder. Certainly, yes, you know, I had enough kind of bro science and, you know, meathead experience and whatnot, but it didn't take me long to grow past bodybuilding and just evolve beyond it more psychologically, spiritually. And there was sort of this getting back to the roots, you know, because martial arts and that ideology, that philosophy, that way of being and moving through life, that's who I was at a core level. And if anything, just like I would think any young person, you explore in your early 20s, like, oh, now I can drink and, you know, whatever. So I think it's easy for young people to kind of get sucked into that hedonic pleasure-seeking way of living. And then unfortunately, I think a lot of them lose themselves in that and never get back to a more eudaimonic way of living. And I think, you know, whether it's martial arts or yoga, I like a lot of the Eastern philosophies. A lot of it is a very mindful, close to nature, spiritual way of living, and also being a resilient, capable organism and human, right? So, you know, when you think about bodybuilding, which I think is a highly toxic culture and sport, candidly, and that's coming from a guy I competed in like 6 shows and all of that. And not that it can't do good things. It can be a vehicle to good things. It can be a mechanism for growth and expansion, but staying in that small bubble, and it's like you're kind of missing the whole point. Like, what's the actual point of sculpting your body? What's the point of building muscle, right? So if it's just that, you know, hedonic, like just want to be jacked, but without that sort of spiritual lens and the bushido of the martial arts way, right? So, but yeah, it was an interesting journey with starting with karate, got the black belt, and then by that point, you know, I was a huge UFC fan, and so MMA was not what it is today. There weren't really like MMA gyms, you know, so I started training at a Krav Maga gym that was like Krav Maga, fitness, MMA, jiu-jitsu, all that stuff. So, wrestled through high school, did the Krav Maga MMA for a long time. And obviously that was perfect for kind of the Navy SEAL pipeline, right? It's like, well, Krav Maga, that's military hand-to-hand combat training, not sport MMA. So that was part of that aspect too. And then, so now it's just like a skill set and a physical capability I have, but it's not like I get to use it and beat up people for a living or anything like that.
Yeah, it's funny because they say, right, like wrestling, or when you've wrestled, like everything else in life is kind of easy.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like one of those things, it's like
That's
you want
true.
to have the tools you need, but you don't always have to use them. And
Yeah.
when you know how to use something well, you can just kind of keep it sharp and, keep it
Yeah.
away.
Well, like my parents, for example, and amazing parents. They're beautiful humans. They're gentle. They're warm. They're kind. They're the best hosts ever. I love going to their house because they just like treat people so well. But gentle, right? And I didn't want to be gentle, right? I think, I don't know, maybe I was a smaller kid. I was always like the smaller kid, right? And it's like, I don't want to be seen as small. Like, no, I'm an alpha,
Yeah.
But with martial arts, even, they were very supportive and cool with the karate thing, the traditional. But then when it came to like MMA and Krav Maga, it's getting like hardcore and intense and kind of scary and dangerous looking, then they were worried like, oh, is he going to become like violent? And then I'm playing like Call of Duty, headshot, boom. Right. So, there was kind of that question of concern of like, which way is this going to go? In a good way, a character building exercise way versus a pathological way. But it was a beautiful journey, and I feel like I sort of have incidentally become kind of like a samurai of functional medicine, as dumb as that might sound. I think it's cool. Other people maybe not, but I embody those same ideals, and I've just translated it to my field of study. But yeah, I mean, having that physical skill set, I mean, I think to our point about fitness, it's extremely important to develop the neuromuscular system as early in life as possible, because it's something just like the microbiome in the first 1,000 days, right? Like if you don't establish that microbiota in the first 1,000 days, it has implications for the rest of your life. If you don't train and develop your neuromuscular connectivity early in life, I feel really bad for people that were never put in sports. And, it's one thing, team sports, that's a different route. But when I'm thinking of training the body, martial arts is a great one. I think yoga would be great. Gymnastics is a great one. That's going to train multiple energy systems, have the mobility, the joint health, and the neuromuscular proprioception. So,
Yeah.
but again, with kind of that dichotomy of the holistic savage, I mean, that's why I like that, brand name, if you will, of, okay, the holistic, the softer, the yin, and then the masculine, the harder, the savage, the yang. Like, it's balance.
Yeah, that's kind of why the first thing I said was like that dichotomy of like being jacked and being like a functional health practitioner, because you don't see that. And it's interesting, medicine usually ends up being more of like a soft and gentle and almost in a sense like weak, in it can end up being neurotic and weaken you, versus like it's meathead or medicine gentle. There's not that blend. So I mean, I think I've seen videos of you deadlift like crazy amounts of weight. I was actually gonna ask you like, what's your? I think I saw you do something like 600 for like reps.
Yeah. Well, it's really sad. It was, I think, the PR, and I was never a 1 rep guy. 1 rep is a good way to hurt yourself. It's just not worth it for most people. So I was always more of like a functional rep kind of guy of like, how many can you do for like 5 or 8, or there's some meaningful number. So I did 585 for 6, and I kind of got used to that weight. And you know how it is. You're always trying to push it a little further, workout after workout, without overdoing it, without hurting yourself. But yeah, I strained my low back, and I'm honestly, I feel fortunate, lucky I didn't, blow a disc or have like a serious injury. But I maybe tore some connective tissue or something back there. So now I don't deadlift anymore, which makes me sad. I miss it. I enjoy it. But yeah, 585 for 6 was the all time. I don't know what I would imagine. I don't feel like I've lost a lot of strength, but you know how it is. Like if you stop doing anything, even for like a month, like there is a sort of, you have to get consistent to get it back and get to that peak. So there's almost more of a neuromuscular disconnection, I think that occurs more than just like a muscle atrophy.
Yeah.
You can stimulate those muscles in other ways, but having the neuromuscular connectivity to be able to pull that kind of weight with that kind of technique and keeping it tight, that's different.
Yeah, which is crazy because I think that's like the epitome of like what I think you agree like is cool is like that well-roundedness of being able to do both at the same time and be successful in both. So it's like you don't have to be a shitty doctor per se and a great physical specimen. You don't have to be weak and be a great doctor. You can
100%.
have that well-roundedness. So
Yeah.
how do you think like you continue to strive for that well-roundedness, and what do you think predisposes or makes you go towards that direction? Because we see a lot of people don't do that. It's just one way, and like in the case of medicine, it's like you just become that.
Well, I will say, like, with our shared passion of microbiome sciences as a good example, with this garden of life, this compilation of microbes, one of the things that's very well established in microbiome research is diversity is better. More diversity equals better health, which is kind of a beautiful biological, spiritual message. Like, not just talking about microbes, but diversity of humans, right? So, I recognize what I am as whatever the hell I am, the holistic savage or Brendan or whatever you want to call me. I recognize like I'm just one microbe in this vast ecosystem, and I'm one kind of archetype, one kind of flavor, but like, let's say, okay, I have plenty of lovely naturopathic friends, right? And naturopathic medicine is usually much softer, or like Chinese medicine, a lot of meridians. It's a very kind of soft and gentle. Or then you think about Reiki, and I'm being respectful towards these modalities because of course there's a time and a place. As opposed to then you think about like harsh synthetic drugs and surgery cutting your body open, which is this very sort of intense, invasive, but there's a place for all of it, right? As much as like polarization sucks to deal with on a societal level, but even polarity will stabilize molecules. So having that contrast, having the polarity, having the diversity of archetypes and passions and methodologies, that's what I love about functional medicine is the functional medicine holistic health space. It's just a melting pot for all of it, all these people, all these modalities, these schools of thought. And so for me, I mean, I honor and respect all of it, but I know what I'm about. And hey, other people may not agree with how I do things or practice or the way I look at things. And, but that's a good thing. Diversity of perspective that advances the collective consciousness and knowledge. But for me, I wouldn't even say I'm trying to be, I would not I don't know that I would describe myself as well-rounded, because for me, I know exactly what I'm about and I'm trying to be the best that I can be at those things. And I literally tune out the rest. I don't care about the rest. I'm not trying to apply. I can respect it, honor it, see the value in it. Like I'm not a musician, for example, random, harmless example. I don't feel at all capable of producing music, but I love music. I cherish music. But I know that that's not a skill set I have, so let me hone and cultivate the skill sets I do have that are in alignment with my natural essence.
Yeah, which is good because it's different than just going through life and letting the environment choose that for you. You've chosen those things and you've recognized them intentionally, which is ideally, the best case scenario. Mm-hmm. What would you say those are in your case of like the pillars or the specific areas that you have chosen or you see as your priorities and value?
Yeah, I think it's really important for everybody to develop a belief system, a core value system. That's a whole conversation itself with religion and spirituality and philosophy. I think it's important because we're all just organisms, that there is a combination of our environment is sculpting us, and then how are we choosing to respond or behave within the environment, because we do have consciousness, we do have free will. There's our natural pulls and inclinations, but we can choose to practice our higher consciousness and be deliberate about, I choose to participate in this ecosystem in this manner. Because it feels in alignment with my biological truth. It feels in alignment with what I think is going to make this ecosystem or world better. So I think having those core values that life can be that sort of ocean. At times it's beautiful and calm and amazing. Other times it's stormy and choppy and you'll drown. So being able to move through life and keep the ship of your soul steady, you're only going to do that if you have core values in place. So respect, honor, integrity, empathy, compassion, humility. I have so many kind of core values that I strive to stay in alignment with. And this is also where I love the Japanese philosophy of ikigai. It's your reason for being. It's a whole philosophy system that, to me, and again, it's my bias because of my background, but I think a strong set of core values and a strong sense of purpose in ikigai, I think these are actually pretty essential on a spiritual and biological level for human health. And to me, when I look at, the American population and the American mental health crisis, or other places, not to be exclusive to America, but I think a huge part of the mental health crisis is what we're talking about here. Not necessarily like, oh, vitamin D deficiency, or you just need a probiotic, or, a CGM to get your glucose down. Like, sure, those are all little micro physiological things we might need to address, but without sort of that spiritual meaning and purpose and core values, well, of course you're going to feel lost and apathetic and depressed and anxious, right?
Yeah. Kind of going back to the post high school and time you got into fitness and personal training, what was the transition into kind of, I guess, what led you into your mental health focus and interest?
Yeah, well, so I was like 20, 21, working full-time as personal trainer and nutrition coach, competing in bodybuilding a little bit, not like multiple shows a year or anything, but I was living and breathing the bodybuilder, fitness, nutrition, professional lifestyle. So, certainly there were things about my health I could critique a little bit, but overall is metabolically sound. But I wasn't in a great place mentally, and for a lot of reasons. And I wouldn't say it was a brain chemical imbalance or something like that. There were a lot of layers to it. There was a sort of spiritual crisis going on, I would say. I can see that hindsight easier than I could recognize it at the time. And just the allostatic load of, like, my schedule was rigorous back then. In between going to school full time and working full time, and trying to explore my young life and explore love and relationships. So there are a lot of layers, a lot of elements, but ultimately I was really depressed. I was really stressed out. I was super fatigued and exhausted. So I just wasn't doing great because of all these variables. And then I got caught up in what turned out to be just, as cliche as the word toxic has become, is a horribly dysfunctional relationship. And I've spent years psychoanalyzing all of it. I learned those lessons the very painful, hard, slow way. But it was through getting caught up in a bad situation that really just pushed me over the edge. I mean, I had already been sort of ideating, fantasizing about suicide as like there was something comforting of imagining it at times, and suicidal ideation. And I don't make light of any of it. I recognize how sensitive of a subject it can be, better than most people, because then I found myself kind of pushed over the edge by a bad triggering situation and swallowed a bottle of pills. And long story short, I wake up in the ICU breathing out of a tube, was in a medically induced coma for, I think, somewhere between 48, 72 hours. They thought I was going to die. The nurses told me that. It was a horrible thing. And then, after the ICU, psych ward, and then after the psych ward, had to do intensive group therapy for 9 hours a week for 6 weeks, while trying to get back to work and get back to my life, while trying to get back to school and get caught up. So it was a very pivotal moment in my journey because, while I would say I'm established and respected in my industry, there are those that critique, like, but he doesn't have credentials. And it's like, well, actually, I have a ton of credentials, but I don't have an MD, I don't have a PhD, I don't have a college degree. For one thing, academia didn't seem like it was going to give me the education I needed or wanted, number one. And two, three, there's something to be said about learning style and neurodivergence and ADHD, which I was diagnosed with when I was 21. And there's a practicality on the economic side. But a big part of it that I'm building up to is as I was trying to catch up on my schoolwork that I missed from almost killing myself, I couldn't even get an extension on some of these papers, let alone did I see the value in writing these papers or the assignments with what I knew. So I'm maybe a more intense driven person. So if it feels superfluous and not getting me closer to my goal, like why the hell would I do it? So that was kind of the perfect crisis moment. It wasn't intentional, but I had to drop out of the semester and I just never re-enrolled because then I launched myself into what became the most traumatic experience of my life with that relationship. So it was weird of, okay, I almost just killed myself. Now I'm in a really bad situation and I don't even fully realize it because I'm young and naive and I think I'm in love. And so then I go through this traumatic relationship, learned a lot of lessons, but it was trying to save that partner that kind of further pushed me into functional medicine and exposed me to things like parasite protocols and MTHFR and whatever. And ultimately, I couldn't save her. I couldn't save the relationship. I lost so much. I lost everything and ended up in my parents' basement, like broke and broken. And it was horrible. But that's when I started the climb. That's when the hero's journey really began. And ultimately, she took her life tragically, horribly. There's other layers I'd rather leave out. Whereas I went on to just fully immerse myself into functional medicine. And it took me a while after I had entered functional medicine to then figure out, like, but what am I about? And what do I want my business and my mission to be dedicated to? And it just very organically of functional medicine for mental health with a very heavy metabolic, emphasis on it. And so then here we are, a lot of years later.
Yeah, that's definitely a powerful story. So did you see at that time, like when you thought of functional mental health, did you see that there was like a huge gap? Because I'm guessing at that time that was not a talked about thing.
Like functional medicine for mental health?
Yeah.
Or yeah, I mean, honestly, it still kind of shocks me in the industry of, I feel like, now functional medicine is like it rapidly growing, but teeny little Wild West entrepreneurial industry at the moment. Now, what it has the potential to be is what really lights me up and excites me. I believe in functional medicine. I believe in what this movement could do for not just Americans, but the whole world if structured well. And there's a lot that's going to need to happen for that to really happen. But it does kind of hurt a little bit of like, I think functional medicine is way behind on what it could be or should be. And so to answer the question directly of, yeah, there should already be a lot more functional medicine for mental health. But yeah, I saw the needs gap and I was like, well, I'll do something about it. And so I'm just one guy doing what I'm doing. And, I could rattle off a lot of great names of other providers and practitioners that are doing a lot of great work in the functional medicine for mental health space. But yeah, I'm just doing my part because it's what I feel called to do.
A lot of people still don't understand the kind of emerging science and understanding we're gaining on mental health. Until recently, I mean, I think I saw a big article that got published that was talking about how that theory of, chemical imbalance is kind of getting moved past, which I thought was a big deal for that to be shared in the mainstream news source. But a lot of people are still under that perception, and even then they don't really understand it. So like, from your perspective, how would you explain to someone who has like no understanding of functional mental health, like what really is mental health and how does it work?
Yeah, well, what is mental health is a huge question, very profound one that I think everybody should explore within themselves robustly. Because I think if you don't define what does mental health mean to you, what does that look like to you, what does that feel like for you, how do you ever acquire good mental health if you haven't defined it for yourself? My version of what I consider to be good mental health for me may not be anything like what it looks like for you or somebody else. So there's that element to it, but the approach that I can't speak for anybody but myself, but with the work that I'm doing and, my institute and foundation and all the things that I do, my approach is much more along the lines of, and I should preface by saying I kind of think of a pie chart, and I think of, conventional psychiatry and the neuropsychiatric drugs. There's absolutely a place for that. And I know that there's a lot of anti-pharma people. I'm not anti anything. Everything has a time and a place. So while I can respect the anti-pharma sentiment, like, to deny that some of those drugs can be absolutely life-saving and extremely valuable for managing mental health disorders, it would be foolish to deny that. So there is that component. The psychotherapy, and of course there's a lot of types of psychotherapy, but just in general, that inner work, spiritual, psychological, psyche is soul, so really the same thing. That's a critical component. The missing piece, though, is the functional medicine function, physiological function, right? And so to your point, the conventional psychiatric system, the model in place, which is always evolving, but it is largely based on the brain chemical imbalance theory, or the monoamine theory. And so what I do as a clinical educator and researcher is I'm trying to essentially kind of translate that clinical science liaison of translating the science that exists that is massively abundant and powerful. It just hasn't leaked and disseminated down into the mainstream. I'm just one guy that's helping to translate and funnel all of this information and research that exists and disseminate it. And I'm more technical. I'm not like your mainstream water it down and make it super simple for everybody in America to understand. It's like, no, I train providers and practitioners and give lectures to health providers, and then they go and can disperse and disseminate that information to their patients. So, in that way, I'm almost like more of a B2B educator instead of a D2C educator in a lot of ways. But yeah, there's a lot of opportunity for it. And I think if people kind of reframe their perspective of how do I increase my level of function, that could be psychologically, that could be spiritually, that could be physiologically. The physiological is a big component, though, right? Like if you're overweight, diabetic, fatty liver, leaky dysbiotic gut, mitochondrial insufficiency, all these, flavorful terms we can throw out and rattle off. But how could you possibly feel good mentally, cognitively, neurologically if all of your physiological systems are messed up? And look, I can't tell you what your ikigai or purpose or spiritual meaning is. I can't develop your core values for you. I can't resolve your trauma for you. But I can at least help you troubleshoot your physiology and get your physiological systems more optimized to enhance the unlearning, relearning, neuroplastic rewiring that's going to happen for mental health to ever be acquired. So certainly, again, though, not just optimizing physiology, but this holistic sort of esoteric approach that we're talking about, and just holding space for everybody to find their own way for themselves. That's all I can ultimately do.
Yeah.
I'm constantly preaching that we need to track physiology more than chase root causes. That's one of my big constructive offerings to my field, to my industry, is let's make sure we're tracking clinically significant, established, well-studied biomarkers reflective of physiological function. We need to be tracking that. If we want to run functional testing that explores the presence of possible root cause factors, whether it's parasites or heavy metals or nutrient insufficiencies or toxins or whatever it is, that's fine. We can test for the presence of these scary things. But if we don't assess the physiology, we can't draw parallels of how does the presence of these potentially harmful things, but how is it actually actively affecting and disturbing the human physiology? For example, I get tons of, inquiring potential clients that want to become clients of my practice. And so many of them, Brendan, I feel like my brain is on fire. I have neuroinflammation because, all of my work centers around neuroinflammation. So then I put that kind of information out there, and then I get a lot of people that identify, it resonates with them. But just because they think or feel like they have neuroinflammation doesn't mean they physiologically do. So then if I run all the fancy, expensive biomarkers, and they're eager to throw their money at testing, right? But then when the test results come back and it's like, well, you really don't have elevated neuroinflammation. So what do you think is negatively impacting your mental health? It's like deer in the headlights because, well, my confirmation bias said I had brain on fire. So if I don't have a brain on fire, then why am I not happy? Why am I symptomatic? So it invites us to explore other areas. But the objectivity of lab testing, the objectivity of tracking the flux of physiology, not just, well, I have this many mycotoxins in my urine this time. I have this many antibodies towards heavy metals in my blood this time. My hormones might not be a good example. This parasite came out on my stool test, right? And you can lose yourself and potentially lose or harm your mental and spiritual, psychological health by getting caught up in this sort of hamster wheel. It's like a addiction to the fear crisis of like, well, what root cause can I do something about now? And it's, what are we avoiding facing by doing that? Because that feels productive. It feels like I'm exploring root cause factors that are harming my health. I'm going to optimize my health. But you can, if done too much, if it goes too far, it can become this neurotic addiction. And especially with the health condition of OCD, that does not go well. I think functional medicine does not combine well with OCD, and that's a different, episode for a different day, or panic disorders, anxiety disorders. But either way, there's an art to it for sure.
So is that kind of like where your mental map lab comes in?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what. So there's the research foundation and everything. I want to research and education foundation that I want to do a lot more with in time. The Institute, which is the FMHP program. So that's where I train practitioners in this methodology that I've developed. And then it's all in the backbone of the mental map, which is essentially a proprietary custom lab panel that I designed. And it does a lot of things, but the primary focus, MAP is an acronym for microglial activation profile. So the whole point was really sort of the scientific angle of the neuroinflammation, which, going back to what we were talking about earlier, there are a lot of layers to mental health, the monoamine theory, all the theories of mental illness. Monoamine, that's the brain chemical imbalance theory. Mitochondrial theory, Chris Palmer is kind of the well-known guy for a lot of the work around the bioenergetics associated with neuropsychiatric disorders. So mitochondrial component, the neuroendocrine, all the hormones and the neurotransmitters, the thyroid connection, the steroid hormone connection. But the neuroinflammation and the microglial, that's its own theory of mental illness, or the gut-brain axis, that's its own theory. Now, for me, I try to be well in the connectome. I try to be very knowledgeable on all of the theories because they're all just layers, pieces of the puzzle that is mental health. Although I still think from a more kind of clinical research, we really need to establish and invest more into a missing theory that is more kind of the spiritual crisis, the esoteric, the spiritual component. Not to go on a huge tangent, and I'll keep it succinct, but I think it's critical to understand, it'll expand your mind, of placebo, nocebo. Everybody knows about placebo. Placebo says if I believe that this hypothetical pill that I'm taking is going to help me feel better and improve my health, if I believe that, I'm much more likely to experience a positive health outcome. That's why we have to control for the placebo effect to do legitimate clinical trials. We have to be able to separate actual mechanism of action and efficacy from the self-induced placebo response. And it's like, wait a second though, self-induced, I can give myself a health benefit through the power of belief, right? The biology of belief. Everybody tells me to read that book, never have. But I am aware of that term, biology of belief. And there is a biology to it. Nobody talks about the nocebo effect, which is the opposite. Nocebo is if I believe something is hurting me, I'm much more likely to basically induce my own negative symptoms. So just to sort of offer that to the audience of like, so what happens then if you don't feel good and then you have a functional medicine provider be like, oh, well, I think you have mold illness and MCAS and histamine intolerance and methylation issues, mitochondrial dysfunction and parasites and leaky this, leaky that. well, that all sounds really scary, right? I believe that I have all these things hurting me. Well, I even have a $400 urine test that says I have a bunch of mold toxins in my urine. And the test report says that they're carcinogenic. How could I not believe that that's hurting me? How do we not know that 30% of their symptoms are being caused by the belief that that scary stuff that they measured on the paper is hurting them? This is why we have to assess the physiology. You could have horrible looking functional testing and tons of toxins and bugs coming out of your body, but you could also still be physiologically sound on paper. But then if you get psychologically disturbed by the root cause pursuit or the root cause reveal, well, shoot, you could ironically get this negative health outcome because of the self-induced nocebo effect. So that's why, as great as functional medicine is, it's not really complete without functional psychology, which is kind of a branch of what I teach. I also am concerned about how often people will try to put their health responsibility on somebody else, an external coach or practitioner or whatever. People do that to me every week. People are constantly trying to make me responsible for their health. And I immediately, lovingly, no, that's yours. I would be doing you a disservice by trying to take responsibility for your health outcome in so many ways. That's for you. And what a beautiful gift that I'm giving back to you so that you can become autonomous. You can become fully sovereign in your body and in your health. So accessibility, affordability, and also there's just the market trends of the education and information should be readily accessible. Now, the ability to integrate and implement that information into your day-to-day lifestyle, that's the work. That's the work that people have to do. And if they have to employ tools like lab testing or supplements or peptides or psychedelics or coaches or practitioners, those are just tools to support the journey. But at the end of the day, it's your journey and you still have to walk that path.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess like what would be your kind of general recommendation, let's say, to somebody wanting to improve their health just for normal purposes, optimize, or maybe take it more seriously, and then someone who maybe has some things going on and they're thinking about like what's the next step?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of components. I mean, certainly when it comes to the invitation of bringing others into our journey, into our experience, which I think we should be very mindful and intentional around who we allow to participate in our sandbox of life. Who do we allow to come with us on our journey and in our path, has to be the right fit, right? If you're going to hike a mountain that is life, metaphorically speaking, who do you want to have as your travel buddy or companion? And they might be with you for a leg of the journey. They might not be on the whole journey with you. I mean, there's kind of just the one life partner that you hypothetically do all of life with. And of course, the lifestyle foundations, which I think we've done a pretty good job encapsulating. Without those lifestyle foundations, it's going to be really hard without the purpose or the ikigai. But certainly, I think a lot of our experience of life and what we might think of as our mental health is largely influenced by the stories that we're telling ourselves in response to our environmental input signals, in response to what's going on in our lives and our worlds, and the stories that we create as sort of a narrative to explain life itself, right? So that's where, there's a lot of great spiritual teachers out there. It's like, well, if you're not enjoying the life that you have, or you're not enjoying the story that you're telling yourself, you can always change the story. Or if it's more of an environmental thing, like let's say you live in a area that you're not thriving in, whether job, relationship, a city, whatever it is, maybe you need to translocate. Maybe you're a biological entity that's not in the proper environment. You're not going to see a goldfish like thriving on land or something. It just doesn't make sense. So there's kind of the environmental epigenetic component. There's the psychosomatic. What stories are we telling ourselves in response to our life circumstances? But that's why, like, when we think about all these higher level aspects that we're talking about that largely influence our psychological well-being, doesn't it feel extremely myopic to be like, well, but heavy metals are my oxalates are my root cause, so I spend so much time trying to avoid, oxalate rich foods or whatever it is. People get so caught up on the root cause thing, and it's one thing of like, let's say tragically you acquire Lyme disease. I wouldn't wish that upon anybody. How horrible. But then when you see people that are identifying as like, I'm a limey, and it's like, it's become an identity. It's become almost a hobby in a way. Like, whoa, that once upon a time tragic disease has now become this sort of possibly pathological identity and narrative that's defining your life. I mean, in my opinion, and I see this a lot too, a lot of individuals trying to self-heal and identifying as self-healers, they healing becomes their whole life. You look at that Brian Johnson guy that's blowing up right now and just has the Netflix documentary, and I look at that, look, if you do you, right? Teach their own. If that's how he chooses to, that's how he intentionally chooses to experience his life, that's fine, but I certainly don't want to live that way. Looks highly neurotic and pathological and self-centered and egoic. Not for me. Cool that you do you, but that's part of it is, I think a lot of individuals that are trying to heal, but what does that mean to them? Which kind of goes back to like, what does healing mean to you? What does mental health mean to you? So there's bigger questions people have to explore if they want to. How do you reach an end goal if you haven't defined what you're trying to accomplish? It doesn't make sense.
Yeah. I think one thing I've heard is like a lot of people that path gets so drawn out that it's like they're constantly chasing getting back to where they were. So for example, the Lyme case, like, oh, get back to how I felt before I had the Lyme disease. But when that's 5 years ago and now you've developed this identity, you might have this bias that you've built off, everything was perfect. Then you're not thinking about, I still got like 2 headaches a week and I still felt kind of low energy a lot of days. Now it's like this perfect perception that you've created that you're chasing that is inaccurate and unattainable. And now you've put yourself on this rat wheel of just spinning and trying to run after your own tail. So how do you think, or in your experience, how have you kind of held the two things, especially being someone who's so technical, so into the science and the mechanisms? Like at first glance, someone might think like, oh, when you know every mechanism, everything you see like is like, are you watching UFC thinking, oh, neuroinflammation, oh, is his blood-brain barrier compromised? You know what I mean? Like, how do you hold those in a healthy balance, do you think?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. That's like looking at my life, my career is so deep into the science of it all. The myopic mechanism, because it's just like, that's what I'm into. That's what I enjoy. I find it intellectually stimulating. And then there's sort of the component of, advancing the science is my ultimate goal. At least helping to contribute to disseminating the science in a language that's going to empower people to improve their own lives is certainly a component of my work. But meanwhile, beyond my work, beyond my mission, the way that I live my life is very spiritually intentional. So that influences a lot of the approach as well. Yeah, I have to kind of compartmentalize certain things. I have my more kind of research science component of my career, the service component, the business component. There's a lot of, and I have to be able to separate those. And so for example, this is tangible. I teach my practitioners in my certificate program. I teach my practitioners, we already hit the big, like, okay, track physiology more than chase root causes. That's one of the big ones that I just like drill into their head. And drilling into their heads, being very cognizant of the language that they're using with their clients or patients to obviously avoid a placebo or nocebo effect. And if anything, maybe harness a positive psychosomatic, placebo effect. But also keeping theory out of practice. A lot of practitioners, we love the science, we love the research, we love reading research papers and looking at mechanisms of action and kind of going down these rabbit holes. But I have to teach them, you have to separate that, because at the end of the day, that's really us nerding out on stuff that we're interested in. But that has no place when it comes to serving another person that's paying you for your time really well, and you're there to help them actually improve their quality of life. They don't need to know about mechanisms. They don't need to know about myopic pathways. That's probably not relevant or getting served. So this is an interesting contrast. I was thinking about the clients I worked with in the beginning of my career. I was a personal trainer and nutrition coach. So, they're just normal people walking into a gym to sign up for a membership. And, oh, well, actually, I don't really know how to work out, so I'll sign up with this personal trainer guy. And with that population, demographic, clientele, I wish they were more into their health, because if I could just get them to show up for their weekly PT sessions, that's a win. If I could get them to allow me to try to talk to them about nutrition for maybe one session a week or one session a month, that was a win. So part of it, there was this transition from that profession into more functional medicine. For a while, I was kind of doing both. I was still training out of a private studio, but I was also working with, private clients more on the functional medicine side. And I found like those are really two different customer demographics, actually. Those that are pursuing workouts, which are a little lower on the spectrum in the sense that, you probably wouldn't be paying somebody to take you through a workout if you were really into working out and had been doing it a long time. You don't need it, you know how. So then, other people, there's so many people. I mean, 8 billion of us on Earth. So there's a lot of demographics and skill sets, knowledge bases, biases. But it is interesting because now, like the clients that I attract, my constructive reflection to them is like they're too myopic, they're too lost in the weeds, they're missing the bigger picture, right? And that's why psychedelics are such a huge part of my work and everything, with just the clarity that psychedelics can bring. So that can definitely open people up to a lot of possibilities they hadn't considered before. They got like really locked onto this narrative, this idea, this theory, this myopic perspective. And then it's like, oh gosh, there's a lot of other things that maybe would be more fruitful for me to apply my time and energy and resources to. Yeah. But ultimately, look, one of the best things you can always sort of challenge people of, how's that working for you? Yeah. Great, that's how you're approaching your self-healing. How's that working for you? And then just see what they say, right?
Yeah. What's the actual result and outcome of it? Because that's ultimately, if it works for you, then it's great. It's doing something right. And if not, then yeah.
And if they're cool with it, great. Yeah. We all get to choose what our life experience is.
Yeah. It's interesting you said that, because like I actually hadn't thought about that so much, and like this conversation is giving a lot of clarity on how important each of these individual factors are in the process. So it's even making me kind of question something I've said before, which is like one of my top recommendations to your average person is like find a good practitioner you like and trust and work with them in optimizing your health. A lot of people just in place of a PCP, maybe you meet with a naturopath once a year, but now I'm thinking about it again, because in certain cases that could end up doing more harm than good, because again, there's always so much nuance. Who is the person? How are they talking to the patient? And like when you mentioned that, I've heard a practitioner do some neurological physical testing on someone, like, oh, like I don't remember what it was, but it's like, oh, your cerebellum isn't working. And it's like, to the patient who maybe they don't know what a cerebellum is, maybe they don't like that, just it's like, oh, this part of your brain's not working. It's like, well, that's not, even if that's the case, that's not going to be very helpful for them to hear. It's like they're nerding out, like you said, they're sharing, they don't need to share the science, but also they don't need to push mechanisms or diagnoses in a unhelpful manner, which is what we see even in conventional medicine, right? Like throwing these labels on people. It's like, I think I've heard you use it a lot. Dysfunction is a much more positive and constructive term to use. It's like there might be some dysfunction here because, just saying something as concrete as like, oh, your cerebellum isn't working. It's like, well, what led you to believe that? What do you mean by it's not working? Like all this thing, which comes back to, again, right, like tracking the physiology. And so that's a huge component. And yeah, so makes me rethink even that and the clarity. And even like, for example, the role of something like psilocybin, I didn't know much about it, and that added clarity. And like, it seems like the type of demographic of people you're working with are a very specific type that are highly educated in terms of patients, right? Like they seem to have a lot of experience with functional medicine, maybe have worked with a number of people already. They have lab tests and these kinds of things. And, now they're coming to you with all that experience and knowledge and beliefs that they might have to unlearn and all that, right?
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, everybody has to find what works for them. And there's also delineating. This is where having a coaching background has served me very well. I do feel that, health coaches, as they're typically referred to as, have not gotten the respect that they maybe deserved in this space, in this industry. I think that's changing. I think the rise of the tide of functional health coaches, whatever you want to call them. I always, when I was younger, when people like my doctor friends might refer to me as a health coach, like it was a little offensive, to be honest. I'm like, you think I'm like just a health coach? I could do laps around you. It's ridiculous. It felt kind of disrespectful. I think the coaching space has come a long ways, though. I think we collectively have earned our place in the functional medicine space. I think we've earned more respect. I think there's a lot of doctors that have been humbled of like, oh, wow, like that coach with no credentials knows their stuff and is doing some good work. But there's also a very important component. You think about like traditional medicine, it's not the most psychologically palatable, thing. It's one thing to have a bedside manner, but the art of coaching, right? That's an underappreciated art in science in itself that is sort of parallel to, clinical psychology in a lot of ways. The ability to effectively deliver information in a way that's going to be empowering rather than fear-mongering, right? So there's definitely an art to that, the art of coaching, behavior modification. So there's the behavioral side of it and then the neurological side. And obviously we need the neurological, neurochemical side to be working optimally in order for the behavioral to really happen. But I don't think enough focus in functional medicine is on the behavioral and the psychological side. So that's something that excites me about my program, for example, is I have a lot of therapists that come to my program because they're trained as LPCs and psychologists, but they want to learn functional medicine. Because then, if you can help support the psychology and the physiology, that makes you a really valuable professional, in my opinion. So it's a skill set thing. A lot of, MDs maybe don't have the coaching education to effectively coach. They may be able to diagnose and prescribe, and that's great. That's a skill set. But can they coach effectively? Whereas then coaches, maybe they can't diagnose and treat and prescribe and practice medicine. But that's where functional medicine, there's a space for all of that, right? There's a time for diagnostics and prescriptions and surgeries and whatever, but the art of coaching is really missing, the behavioral component. Now, the patient has to have intrinsic motivation to want to change their behaviors, but they also maybe need the safe space and the reflections and the motivational interviewing to help them actually make the behavioral changes possible and sustainable.
That's huge because I've noticed that kind of missing link in the practitioner model actually, but this added more clarity to it. And looking at it even in a business perspective, I've heard in the business side of functional medicine, like a lot of practitioners are terrible business people, right? And you think optimally there's a two sides to it because at the end of the day, it's a business, they're making a living, but it's also they're doing work and it's skills and care, right? So it's like you think you want both to be in optimal balance. Like some people do decent work, but they have low integrity or you know, whatever with their business practices. And there's all these different ways it can go. But in an optimal world, you would think their business is doing well, high integrity, and their work is good, and those things actually feed each other. Whereas someone might be doing great work, but they don't have the whatever's missing to properly handle their patient relationships. And then it's just like, and I assume this is the case for a lot of people, I've seen it firsthand with some, they just have such a high patient churn because it's like you're seeing them on a one-off appointment, you see them, you do the functional labs, you give them prescription, whatever it is, diet, supplements, whatnot, protocol, and then they're on their own to figure out how to implement that a lot of the time. A lot of the time there isn't actually much detail in the instructions. Like, all right, you know, cut this out, cut that out, start taking this and do this like twice a day. And this person's just overwhelmed with all this stuff and trying to implement it. And the compliance, the discipline is hard. They might come back. Again, that's on them to then go and take that initiative to schedule an appointment to come back. And then the doctor's going to be like, all right, how's it going? And they might have done it to an extent or not. And they might not, you know, want to say that, yeah, I didn't take the supplements, I didn't make your recommendations. So maybe they lie. Practitioner assumes, all right, they've been doing what I've been doing. Okay, this didn't work. All right, next functional lab test, next this, next that.
Right.
And then it kind of ends up in this negative feedback loop, almost like a toxic relationship where patient isn't getting what they need, but they're not communicating, that they're not implementing what the practitioner is recommending, but they keep coming back. So it kind of comes at this point where the odds are they're either going to keep coming back and kind of be falling off with the implementations, or they're just going to fall off and like not reschedule. And like I've even found myself, like I think of myself as probably not your average patient for like a functional medicine practitioner. But, you know, even myself, one time, you know, I found myself like procrastinating ordering my full script, you know, put in the full script order. And I'm like, if I'm doing this, what is the average patient doing? And, you know, I can justify to myself like, nah, you know what, let's schedule the appointment. Like it can do a month, it can whatever, you know what I mean? So you think like for someone who's also in that same industry, if we're having this type of stuff, what's the average person having? There's definitely some kind of disconnect there. And coaching seems to be what's kind of bridging the gap, because there does need to be that involvement and relationship to actually effectively implement these things and then continue them on lifelong and make it a part of that person's identity and lifestyle.
Yeah, and there's going to be a season of life for everything, and going back to that intrinsic desire to heal or to get better or to change to some degree. But I kind of alluded to this earlier, but I do believe there's something to be said about if somebody really wanted something from life, with life, if they really wanted to make something happen or accomplish something, if they really want it bad enough, they'll figure out how to do it mostly on their own. You know, I'm a decent example of that. I haven't had a ton of mentor figures along the way, like very, very small, short list of people that sort of helped guide me on my path. You know, it was largely my own journey, my own, you know, just evolution and growth. So, you know, as far as kind of burning through practitioners or whatever, you know, they might have to kiss a few frogs. Like that's part of it. In general, you might have to work with few practitioners, and always like I like when the concepts kind of steal from everywhere, in the sense of like if you're working with a provider or a coach or whatever, you might garnish great experience. Like I think about how many therapists I've worked with since I was, you know, a teenager. I've probably worked with at least 4 or 5 different therapists over the years, and it was all therapy, it was all talk therapy. But I got different benefits from each person. I enjoyed the journey with each of those through that time. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think maintaining homeostatic health and longevity and good quality of life for the long haul. But there's going to be the seasons and the currents of life. So it's just part of it, I guess.
Yeah. So in regards to like that, you know, general recommendation of like what can someone do beyond the foundational elements of like lifestyle, you know, environment, nutrition, sleep, what would be maybe like a next step for someone either maybe looking to take their health further, or maybe they have something going on? Like, what actions would you send them towards, like find a practitioner that resonates and aligns with you? Or
Yeah, it gets tricky because that's one thing too. I recognize like socioeconomically, not everybody's going to have the financial means to work with a practitioner. That's a huge, huge issue, which then makes mass education valuable. Just the information, nobody should be restricted on accessibility to information on how to heal themselves. I also don't think medicine and I don't, I think people should have the freedom to be able to kind of buy and reach for whatever they want. Like if you want psychedelics, great, here you go. If you want peptides, great, here you go. If you want drugs and antibiotics or hormones or whatever, I believe in access, and what you do with that, like if, there's an addiction issue or an irresponsibility issue or whatever it is, but access, I don't think it should be restricted. And then, the margins are just gouging people's wallets and stuff like that. That's greed, business model greed. As much as I advocate for the self-healing movement, get professional help. You know what I mean? I do feel like I see too many people try and figure it out on their own, and it's just not going well. So that's the thing. I guess in a way I'm trying to paint this picture of like, yes, use professionals. Like I'm not an auto mechanic person. If my car is making a weird sound, like I'm not going to try to fix that, because not that I couldn't maybe figure it out, but it's going to be, I don't want to, number one. Number two, like I don't want to mess up my car, right? Just take it to a professional that knows what they're doing. And obviously, okay, I'm going to have to get my oil changed every few months forever. So I might not always go to the same auto mechanic, or I'm going to go back to the ones that I had good experiences with. So this applies to practitioners and coaches. But my point partially being like, work with a professional, but for as long as needed. But at some point there needs to be like a maintenance mode and a like, you're sovereign, you're good, you figured out how to be healthy on your own. And maybe, I don't love it when I see like pursuing health or longevity to take over somebody's life, which is why I referred to that Brian Johnson guy as like, I mean, maybe some people want that and good for them, but that doesn't look healthy or happy to me at all. That looks like you're enslaved to some sort of psychological complex that has you, what we see is a symptom of a deeper kind of potentially spiritual issue, which is why in this episode I'm trying to invite people to explore that spiritual component of healing and explore the narratives that they're telling themselves, right? So, I also though think it's important to have some degree of objectivity. So part of this, I was going to refer to like the SMART goal. In the coaching world, we use SMART goals all the time. SMART being an acronym for specific, measurable, attractive, realistic, timely. Because if it's just this open-ended of like, I'm going to start self-healing. Okay, when does it start? When does it stop? When are the check marks along the way? Like, let's structure that journey. Otherwise, you're just kind of going to get lost into the ether or something. So, because I think it goes too far. And then it becomes almost a hobby of like hyper vigilantly monitoring your health or always trying to improve it a little bit. It can go too far, and people have to be able to have the mindfulness to catch themselves when they're losing themselves into something. Now, that could be great or horrible, right? Like if you lose yourself into a pathological self-destructive addiction, that's not so great. Whereas like if you lose yourself in the rapture and passion of life itself, eudaimonically, as you're just fully experiencing your one life, well, I don't know, that sounds kind of beautiful and amazing. So
yeah, it's like when we hear about the people who live the longest and are the healthiest into old age, you hear people say like it's the ones who are busy living. They're not people who have been pursuing health and neurotically trying to do things, fix things, optimize. And like to your point, that's kind of the disconnect in the practitioner model that I see too, compared to, for example, coaching, where it's like there's no structure. It's just like you just come on appointments whenever you feel like it, and we kind of work on this limited basis. versus with the coaching model, you have more of a structure. There's a plan, like, all right, this is what, from the get-go, you're already assessing them before you're even working with them to understand where are they at, what are they dealing with, where do they want to go. This is a timeline that should fit you, and then setting targets throughout that timeline. And then because you know you have that limit, you're going to assess, all right, we're halfway through the timeline as planned. I mean, it's just like a business, right? You're not just constantly moving forward, shooting in the dark. It's like, all right, we're halfway through. This isn't working. It's not moving the needle. Like, we need to reassess and change tactics. Versus some practitioner, maybe it's just like, all right, you told me, for example, you come and you want to fix your neck pain. And I'm like, yeah, I'm a chiropractor. I'll adjust you and help you fix your neck pain. And then 6 months down the road, nothing's really changed, and I'm just doing the same thing over and over. You ideally would hope that the practitioner in that case, like, all right, I'm seeing that what our approach is not working. We need to reanalyze, and it's a together thing too, right? Because again, to your point earlier, the responsibility can't be only on the practitioner. It's like, all right, we need to reassess what we're doing here and what's not working, and figure out a new approach, or maybe need to move on to a different approach entirely. So I think that's something that's definitely missing, and disconnect between coaching and practitioners, which I have been hopeful to see. We kind of have this in between that we were speaking about, like coaching, practitioners doing coaching, and this new model that's evolving, which is in a sense like decentralized health, and also just kind of more logical in its approach.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, I think this conversation is stimulating a lot of great dialogue that hopefully, listeners are receiving and considering a little bit, because I think it's pretty profound and pretty spot on, all the different elements, because, there shouldn't be this intentional cultivation of dependency or codependency between like practitioner and patient or client or whatever. So whoever's contributing to cultivating codependency, that's probably not great. For me personally, like, I like to, okay, go off into the world, like you graduate, go live your healthy life. Because some people, they want to stay, they want to keep going, they want to keep digging, and it becomes that kind of neurotic pursuit. And it's like, but again, defining, well, what are we specifically trying to accomplish? And that's the art of coaching again, where let's actually sit down and clearly define specifically what we want to accomplish. That could be a specific like body composition goal or performance goal, or from a functional medicine perspective, maybe we define like, okay, our functional medicine objective is we're trying to improve your liver health and gut health and hormone health, and here's the biomarkers that we're going to track to objectively know. So that's the thing though, is once we objectively have hit that goal, and you can still measure subjective parameters objectively, like perceived depression. You are at a perception of rating your depression at a 10, on a scale of 0 to 10. Okay, and your goal is to get your perceived depression down to a 3. It's perceived, it's subjective, but we're measuring it objectively. It doesn't really matter how we get it to a perceived 1, as long as we get it there, whether that's a drug or a supplement or a lifestyle or a diet or a psychological birth, whatever it takes to accomplish the goal. And then once we've objectively accomplished that goal, well, now what do you want to do? Go nuts, kid. It's your playground. It's your world.
Yeah. I think it's comes down to that individual's relationship with like their health and lifestyle and exposures. Because like what popped in my head as you were saying that was like a perfect example of this is something like H. pylori, right? It's like, you're not always going to eradicate it, and you're going to be measuring like, what are your actual levels and what are your symptoms. In most cases, the only reason you're going to be treating it, whether the levels show up or not, is because of the symptoms. If the symptoms are no longer there, it can still show up on the test. That's not a problem. If it's still showing up and the symptoms are there, well, it's more the symptoms that you're trying to get to the root of, not just this H. pylori. And like life, you can't avoid exposures. You know, not everything's in our control. So again, like with H. pylori, we have to coexist with it. So people, once even they get to the point, which I think the graduating is the sign of a ideal practitioner, because I have seen that, but I don't think it's very common. But you want someone who's gonna do that, and that comes down to that person and pushing them away and all that. But it's like you have to be able to coexist with the relationship of moving forward once you're done with this and you're just maintenance mode and living your life. which all
Yeah.
comes down to balance and nuance again.
100%. And acceptance and surrender, right? I think a lot of human suffering is induced through resisting things outside of your control. It's a much smoother journey. It's like if you're kind of floating down the river of life, and if you're clawing at the water and freaking out anxiously and trying to grab onto the rocks and the logs as you're being pulled down the current, it's like you're probably going to drown yourself that way, as opposed to like, what, relax your body, float on your back, and just like surrender to the current of life. Allow it to sweep you to where it's going to sweep you. You're going to make it a lot more brutal on yourself by resisting it to some extent. So there's kind of that element. But I liked your analogy there and your comparison. And a lot of it becomes self-awareness of like, why am I even doing what I'm doing? Is it serving me? Is it not? But also not getting, again, too heady, bringing it back to the present moment. That's why connecting with nature, meditation, whatever it is that centers you and quiets the monkey mind that kind of drives us all a little crazy.
Yeah. Even in the sport context, right? It's like when you're learning the motion, you're doing it slowly and then you speed it up and then it becomes second nature and you don't think about it. Same thing once like in regards to health, once you have those health practices, like I can speak for myself. A lot of people are like, oh, like, how do you do this? It's like, because in their mind, it's such a new, distant behavior. It's viewed as hard and taking effort.
Right.
It's like once you've done it for a certain amount of time, it becomes second nature to you.
Exactly.
It doesn't require that effort. And that's just your way of moving through the world and through life.
Exactly. And that to me in my head, when I think of functional medicine, self-healing, it is that. It's like step one or phase one is get them from where they are, dysfunctional, symptomatic, not doing great, and get them to a place where they feel good. They feel good about who they are and how they're expressing their authenticity, and they feel good physiologically, physically, mentally. And then it's a matter of going into this maintenance sustainability mode of, all right, now that you feel whole and healthy and you're doing well, like now what do you want to go do with your life? And what's the minimum effective dose of the different interventions needed to keep you there? But to your point, it's like, great, you're whole, you're steady, you know how to care for yourself, but then you're going to continue to evolve. I mean, you and I are both young, healthy guys. Who's to say, 20 years from now, one of us could have let ourselves go and become obese and fall back into mental illness or whatever. Like, that's life. That's the journey of it. But to your point, though, once you develop the knowledge, the mindfulness, the skills, the behavioral patterns, and especially that easy is earned, right? With repetition, until, with macro tracking. I mean, God, I remember the days when I would like neurotically track my macros and have my food scale and take the time to measure every gram of almonds or whatever, and like how many minutes of fasted cardio. Like that felt like its own form of mental illness. Whereas like now I'm way fitter, healthier, happier, and I don't think about any of it. I just do, and I do what feels good. It's not like I'm on some prescribed nutrition plan or fitness plan or whatever. It's just like, no, this is just how I live and it feels really good. I don't have to think about it. I can put my mind and resources to, I don't know, more interesting and more noble causes.
Yeah. It's kind of like the Brian Johnson example. It's like, all right, you're doing all this for your optimize your health, but like for what at the end of the day? Because good health then is just a prerequisite for you to, or not necessarily prerequisite, it's what you want to have for you to live your life and do things. But what are you using that health for?
Right.
If the health is the only pursuit on its own.
Yeah, exactly.
Again, like chasing your tail.
Yeah, and I guess to some extent, every human, every entity has to kind of choose what they want their life experience to be, what they want their purpose to be. And there is kind of a, you choosing your eudaimonic growth, and there's like a transmutation effect of like, I think especially with some of the kind of celebrity influencer figures, when you have, potentially hundreds of thousands or even millions of people that are kind of liking and encouraging your neural networks to grow in a certain way, so you see some of these kind of character archetypes, the Liver King and, Brian Johnson, and it's a character, and it's a combination of they chose to express that and embody that, but they also were kind of encouraged through the voting of likes and popularity and whatever. So that's the interesting part too, is how, how much are we allowing society to define us and dictate who we are and who we become and others versus staying true to yourself, right? And that to me is the spiritual work that has to occur.
Yeah. That kind of makes me think of, in the business model sense and work and making a living, it's like that's the fine balance between what you choose to do and how you go about it. Because, yeah, on one end of the spectrum, like, you need to make a living, you need to eat, you need to survive. But then on the other end, when someone has that luxury to choose, like in the context of a social media or a business, it's like, yeah, you're going to do what you're incentivized to do because you're chasing, for example, profit. That's going to lead you down one path, and you see that's working, like you're feeding that character, like in the Liver King example. Well, it's going to be harder to switch off path. So you kind of have to have, with that intention from the beginning, decide you're going to be authentic, and that's what you're going to stick with for whatever, insert your why, your purpose. And that's the only way to stay kind of down that healthy, authentic path, and whatever resonates and comes from that. But you can't be stuck to the outcome of like, all right, I'm going to do this because it's working and making me profit. And a lot of people who do that, they end up learning the hard way. Like, once you have that basic needs met and survival is taken care of, you're not going to be able to sustain that or want to sustain that past a certain point, and you're just going to let it all crash and burn and then totally pivot path. So why not try to do that from the beginning so you can just have more progress in the right area and more sustainability from the beginning?
Yeah, I mean, it's a matter of who's dictating your life, the more authentic, true self versus the ego that has maybe gotten out of control. And I don't want to make any assumptions. I don't know Brian Johnson or the Liver King. They might be amazing humans that are playing a character because that's how they've made it and that's what pays the bills, right? I mean, think about like, I never went into pharmaceutical science, although being who I am now, like I think, I think my brain would have been really good as like a pharmaceutical researcher. Like I could see myself doing that in another life. It's not what I'm interested in this life. And, certainly I can see how, people that work for pharma, like how could you not get into it? I mean, for one thing, pharma is extremely lucrative. But also it's like there is something to be said about they are improving quality of life for countless people. They are treating, managing, rarely curing, but more treating, managing disease and pathophysiology. Maybe not really getting to the root causes, right? But, there's a place for it. It makes the world a better place to some degree. But I don't know. I guess that's the question is for some of those characters online. Does it turn off? Like, are they a really genuine, humble, grounded person outside of the character that they play to pay the bills? Or has it taken over their life pathologically? I don't know.
Yeah.
That's for them to figure out.
Yeah. It's interesting because I think of like the way people choose to live their lives, and that's obviously what everyone's trying to figure out while they're doing it, right? But it's like, for people striving for a certain thing and, achieving holistic mastery in a sense, like, obviously you're choosing the areas, but there is a way to go about it and prioritize certain things that leads to odds of having great outcomes, right? Like what I share is like, prioritize your health, prioritize, taking care of yourself in a fitness standpoint, exercise, and then like whatever your work, career, business pursuit is that aligns with you, that's great. And you have these kind of boxes ticked off. So for someone watching this kind of still in that process and finding where they're kind of meant to be geared towards and what direction they want to go in, what kind of general or specific areas would you recommend to someone maybe who's a little bit lost to kind of prioritize to, one, help themselves ground, but also to kind of have a direction in life which hopefully leads them, maybe they haven't found their why or their purpose yet?
Yeah, I think that would be like the perfect wrap-up point because this is something I feel really strongly about of, I think a huge part of healing and mental health, homeostasis, is serving the collective. Now, I've gotten so much pushback on Instagram about this. I've had people like cuss me out over it, which is weird, super weird to me. I really do believe that some of our greatest healing comes through serving others, and I'll contextualize that. Now, some people fully agree with that, and they're like, bless you for saying that. And other people are like, no, it effing doesn't. And it's like, oh, well, you didn't get hugged enough as a kid. But we're not meant to be completely self-serving, egocentric, selfish organisms. Like, even when you look at microbes and bacteria and the microbiota, and then as humans, we're these holobiont beings. That's a compilation of human cells and microbial cells cross-talking with one another and coexisting to create life. But when you look at the microbes, it's not like, this little bacterium's like, I'm going to do me. I'm going to become my highest self. It's all about me, 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 me. It's part of a greater ecosystem, a greater collective consciousness, right? The quorum sensing that's going on between the microbes, and they're communicating, they're coordinating. Let's proliferate. Let's move to this part of the intestines or whatever. Let's create biofilm. Let's create mucus, whatever. Short chain fatty acids. So there's a sort of hive mind collective consciousness. And I think we're way too disconnected. We're way too isolated. We're way too egocentric and sort of self-interested. And a huge part of health and healing is, I think, when we escape beyond the self, and serving others is a great mechanism for that. And of course, like turning your pain into your purpose, as you alluded to, there's a lot of healing, and my journey has very much been that of the lessons that I've taught clients and stuff over the years, or students or whatever. Well, it's just reflective of like the lessons I had to learn on my own the hard way, but I can pay it forward. And there's a lot of healing. I often say my work is my medicine. It's like my work, my career is like my daily dose of the medicine of this is my service to the collective. So definitely where I think people bastardize it and misinterpret it and misunderstand it because they're interpreting it through the lens of whatever they're dealing with. And they might be dealing with some really bad stuff. They might have really hard life circumstances. They're struggling. They're unwell. They're sick. I get it. Like how you can't really serve or pour into others if you have nothing to pour, nothing to give because you're unwell yourself. Sure, be self-interested. Get yourself right. Cut out those toxic people. Focus on yourself. If you've never focused on yourself, I mean, that's probably how you got into the health crisis to begin with. So absolutely invest into yourself. But I think what is tragic is, it's like, well, but once you have healed yourself and become healthy and stable and whatever, to get stuck in that and then take it to a neurotic, self-serving place that we're kind of alluding to, no, now pay it forward. Now serve others. You don't have to be perfect or have it all figured out. But if you have more wisdom or lessons or knowledge that then you can pass on to somebody that hasn't learned that, make this person's path a little bit easier you can't walk it for them, but you can make it a little bit easier along the way. Like that's very healing in itself. So that kind of collective healing, self-healing, like maybe we should scratch the collective healing. How do we all heal collectively as a unified, organism, I guess?
Yeah. And that's a perfect note to wrap up on. And obviously we discussed a lot of different things and it was pretty dense and powerful conversation. The note I guess we could leave things on is like, again, with respect to the conversation, take this, do what you will with it, and move forward and go out and do what you need to do.
Yeah, like heal yourself and then go serve other people and live a good life.
Absolutely.
Don't overcomplicate it. Don't overthink it.
Awesome.
Good stuff, man.
Cool.
Thanks for having me, brother.
That was great,
Appreciate
bro.
it, yeah.